Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. In this video, we're going to talk about the 10 lost tribes, and we're going to talk about them from the point of view of the camp that believes that there's a main body of the 10 lost tribes that are hidden somewhere, and that they're literally going to come from the Arctic region. I came across an article that would make me pretty excited if I was in that camp, and I'm not, but I am flexible when it comes to prophecy. Whatever happens, happens. I'll explain why I'm not in that camp, but we're going to just take this from the point of view of those that believe that there is going to be a large group that come from the north. And maybe it'll look something like this. I know that there's other theories out there as to where they're at, and we'll touch on that as well a little bit. But I got this email from Shauna Munyan, and I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong. Subject line, more signs of the times. Hi, Jared. I just saw this article today after listening to your Signs of the Times video, which I found to be very comforting and reassuring. I felt since just before COVID, as well as during and after, a special inner peace, and I know it is the rest of the Lord. Interesting times ahead, but I feel joy, and I am hopeful and happy. Keep up the encouraging words, spreadsheets, and sharing light and truth. May God continue to bless you. Well, thank you very much, Shauna. I appreciate your email, and I'm glad that you're enjoying the channel, and I hope my channel is in some way a benefit to all of you. She shared a link to a Facebook post by the Christian Broadcasting Network, and it says, "What in the heavens is going on? Another round of remarkable celestial signs is about to unfold as we see the third blood moon in just 2 years. This next blood moon lands directly on Purim, which is a Jewish holiday. Then prepare for, quote unquote, a golden age of solar eclipses, including 3 rings of fire and 3 total eclipses in 3 years. It all includes, quote unquote, the eclipse of the century coming this summer." Now, this right here, the eclipse of the century, this is the main topic of this video, and this is what I'm going to relate to the 10 lost tribes. There's something really interesting about this eclipse, beyond just the fact that it's called the eclipse of the century. All right, continuing, Acts chapter 2, verse 20. "The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and notable day of the Lord come." And then they have a link to their full article on their website, and I just want to read some of that. "Another round of remarkable celestial signs is about to unfold in 2026 on the heels of several blood moons in 2025, which may hold prophetic significance relating to Israel and the Middle East. Last year's 2 blood moons came as Israel entered a final stage of its military campaign to defeat Hamas. With that uncertain geopolitical stage as a backdrop, the world now waits for a ring of fire solar eclipse that's coming February 17th, 2026, followed by a blood moon on March 3rd, 2026, culminating with the eclipse of the century on August 12th, 2026. Okay, now this next part could get confusing. So let's just simplify it right here. So this year in 2026, there are these 3 events: an annular solar eclipse in February, a lunar eclipse in March, and then a total solar eclipse in August. And that's the eclipse of the century. Okay. So these 3 this year, but don't get that confused with what comes after that. It gives like a little description of these 3. I'm not going to read the first 2, but let's look at the third one. "The third major celestial event of this year, a total solar eclipse, will pass over the Arctic Ocean, Greenland, Iceland, the Atlantic Ocean, Portugal, and northern Spain." Now, before I continue, there was just something that caught my eye about this, and I think it was Greenland, mostly because of all the news right now about Trump trying to acquire Greenland. And before I started recording this video, I was looking at X, and it looks like there is some kind of deal in the works where the United States would have some kind of sovereignty over certain parts of Greenland. Um, but I think that's what initially caught my eye. But then I was thinking, okay, Arctic Ocean, Greenland, Iceland. Um, for some reason, I just started thinking about the 10 Lost Tribes and, this classic view of them coming from somewhere in the Arctic region and then coming south. So I decided to think about it a little bit more, and I'll show you what I came up with. Okay, so it's being called the eclipse of the century because day will turn to night for the longest period of time in the entire 21st century for more than 6 minutes. All right, I'm going to skip down. The February 17th Ring of Fire, so that's the first event of these three. So that Ring of Fire annular eclipse and the August 12th total solar eclipse also kick off a new series of eclipses in each category. Space.com has dubbed this unusual schedule of events a golden age of solar eclipses. It goes on to say the rings of fire will occur February 2026, February 2027, and January 2028. Then, in August, we will kick off a stretch of 3 total solar eclipses in just 710 days. The 3 total eclipses will occur August 2026, August 2027, and July 2028. Okay, so again, this year in 2026, we have a ring of fire, a lunar eclipse, and a total solar eclipse. The ring of fire is going to be the first of 3 other or 2 other ring of fires, one this year, one next year, and one the year after that. This total solar eclipse, the eclipse of the century, is going to be the first one of 2 others. So this one this year, one next year, and then another one the year after that. So each year we'll have a ring of fire and a total solar eclipse for 3 years in a row. Hopefully that makes sense. And what's interesting, if we go back down here and we look at these dates, these are centered on 2027. And you know what else is happening in 2027? The open house for the Salt Lake Temple and presumably the rededication of the Salt Lake Temple. That's the year that's in the middle of this pattern of annular and total solar eclipses. And the first of the total solar eclipses is the eclipse of the century. So that already is pretty interesting, but we're going to get to the 10 Lost Tribes and why I'm tying that in. Let's go to the space.com article. It says 2025 saw a lull in solar eclipse excitement. That drought is about to end. From 2026 to 2028, Earth will experience a double eclipse cascade. And then it talks about those dates that we already read. And then it says, a repetition of a pattern last seen from 2008 to 2010. I had to go look and see if there was anything special about 2008 to 2010. The only thing that I came up with is if you go back in time, 2008 was President Monson's first year as president of the church. He became president of the church on February 3rd, 2008. Beyond that, I didn't see much else, but thinking about President Monson, let's go to my spreadsheet called Signs Moons, where I track any sort of lunar event that could be interpreted as a sign. So we have blue moons, lunar eclipses, super moons, solar eclipses. And the first item that I have on here has to do with President Monson. On August 21st, 2017. That was that first great American eclipse that went from coast to coast, and it happened on President Monson's 90th birthday. And then Elder Stevenson actually mentioned that in General Conference. He mentioned the eclipse and the fact that it happened on his birthday. This is the same eclipse. If we go to my Google Earth, and the link for this is in the description box below. It's this eclipse right here. I got this KMZ file for the path from NASA, and one of the most interesting things about this is when you zoom into Missouri, these are all the place markers that I placed on this map that correspond with the different church sites here in Missouri. When I moved to Independence last year around this time, shortly thereafter, I started a new channel called Explore Church Sites, and I've been tracking down all the church sites, not just the big ones, but all the small ones. And I probably don't have everything on here, but this is definitely the majority of what's here, what has, plaques and markers and stuff like that. All of these church sites were within the path of totality for the 2017 Great American Eclipse, with the exception of this property down here in the southern part of Kansas City. This was a property that was owned by Bishop Partridge, and there's a little plaque that you can read. But everything else is in the path of totality, almost perfectly within the path of totality. Up here is Adamonde-Amen. Here's the entrance to Adamonde-Amen. And you see that, relatively speaking, it's just barely within this boundary. And then if you go a little bit further south and to the east, you have Rothville, Missouri. And this is the site. Let me see if I can click on this and have it come up. This is the site where Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith were allowed to escape after being imprisoned in Jackson County, as well as Richmond and Liberty Jail and all that. This is where they were allowed to escape. And that, just like Adamonde-Amen, it's not too far from the boundary of the path of totality. So this is just stunning to me. I think that these are signs. I remember there were many of the religious and many Christians outside of our church that saw significance in this eclipse. But if only they were members of our church, this fact probably would have blew them away. And it still blows me away to this day. And I still think that there was significance to this. I don't know what it was, but I'm not going to forget it. And then in October of 2003, just 7 days after the October 7th attack, there was an annular solar eclipse, and the path of annularity went through Utah. And if you look at all the temples in Utah, represented by these place markers here, it only went over one of those temples, the one in Monticello, Utah. It did go over the Manti Temple, but at that time, the Manti Temple was decommissioned because it was being renovated. So it was very, very unlikely that a path of annularity could go through Utah and miss the maximum number of temples, but that's what happened. Okay. And then we had the most recent one in 2024. And the interesting thing about that is the path of totality went over the Kirtland Temple just a month after it was purchased from Community of Christ. And I was there to document that. And I have the video of it on my channel. And then further up in New York, it went over the Sacred Grove and other church sites in New York. So in my mind, these three eclipses were very church specific, and it's something that the rest of the world could recognize. But as members of this church, we should really take a hard look at this and consider what it means. And we may not fully know what it means, but I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the second coming. So anyway, we're talking about this other eclipse that's coming up and how it could be related to the 10 lost tribes. let's go down here. It says the excitement begins with a total solar eclipse on August 12th, 2026. It'll be the first total it'll be the first total eclipse visible from Europe since 2015 and the first from mainland Europe since 1999. Which really surprises me because these aren't rare per se. You have a number of total solar eclipses throughout the year, like at least like two, three, something like that. I definitely would have thought that there would have been at least one since 1999 in mainland Europe, but I guess not. And then it says the path of totality for the August 2026 solar eclipse will begin. Okay. Now, I feel like this is significant if it has anything to do with the 10 lost tribes, because you think about them coming from the north and then coming south. Okay, like that would be their path from north to south. It says it'll begin in remote Siberia, which my understanding, I've heard some people say in the comments that some people think that they could be in Siberia, in large caverns or something like that. But it'll begin in remote Siberia, cross eastern Greenland and western Iceland, and then sweep across northern Spain before exiting just east of the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean. Let's go to my map, and I downloaded a KMZ file that you can find on this website. I'll put a link for this in the description box below. The person that runs this is Javier M. Hubier. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But this is what it looks like. So from Siberia, and then it gets pretty close to the North Pole. And then it comes down through Greenland, and then it nicks Iceland right here. Just barely nicks Portugal. Portugal is where my mom is from, by the way. But it seems like on the Iberian Peninsula, it's mostly in Spain. And, it actually gets somewhat close to Barcelona. I served my mission in the Spain-Barcelona mission, and it gets pretty close to Palma. I spent 6 months on this island. This island is called Mallorca, and the main city is Palma. This is Palma de Mallorca. I served in Palma, and then we opened up a new area in Inca right here. Anyway, that's just a side note, a personal note. But yeah, so you have the shadow going from north to south. Could this be pointing to the 10 lost tribes? I don't know. It's exciting to think about. Like I said, if I was in that camp, I would probably be much more invested in this, but for me, it is still pretty interesting. And the thing about it, okay, so look at this. It's happening August 12th, which is interesting that it's on the 12th because that makes you think of the 12 tribes when the 10 lost tribes, looking at it from the other camp's point of view, when the 10 lost tribes come, then you have all 12 tribes together, right? So August 12th, that's very fitting. But also, that camp has the idea that when they come, that's when New Jerusalem, the actual city in Independence, Missouri, will be built, and when the temple will be built. Only when the 10 lost tribes come. Now, lately, we've been thinking a lot about the Community of Christ Temple, which is part of Temple Land. There's supposed to be a 24 temple complex. It's not just the temple lot right here, which is owned by this small church called Church of Christ Temple Lot. They only have 7,000 members worldwide. We would also need the land over here where the Community of Christ Temple is. And Community of Christ has been putting out a lot of very interesting messages over the course of, I'm not sure how long, but it really seemed like it started in earnest on November 1st. And I've done a series of videos about that. And I did a video where I was wondering, could it be like the Kirtland Temple where the church seemed to have planned the purchase to happen in March. Remember that it was March 27th that the Kirtland Temple was dedicated. Well, the purchase took place on March 5th, and then it was closed for 20 days, and then it reopened on March 25th, just in time for the anniversary of the dedication of the Kirtland Temple. And so, if any of this land right here, whether it's the temple lot or the Community of Christ Temple or auditorium, if any of that land was purchased, would the church do something similar? And what would that date be? Or what would the month be? Well, I came to the conclusion that it could possibly be in July or in August, because it was on August 3rd, 1831, that the temple lot was dedicated. And I think it was the day before that, August 2nd, that um, just the general area for Zion was dedicated as a land. So, you know, so you have potentially that could happen this year. And then we have this eclipse that's coming from the Arctic region. And if that theory turns out to be true, that there literally is a large group of people that are going to come from the north, that would be really, really interesting. Really, really interesting timing. So I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. And I think that we should always keep our minds open. Um, Now, let me just get a little bit into why I'm not in that camp. It mostly has to do with this exercise that I did. It's not based on my own preference or my own reasoning or anything like that. For me, it comes down to what prophets and apostles have said. We have the scriptures, but the problem is that when it comes to things that are ambiguous or hard to understand, certain prophecies, um, you have any number of people that will read the same scripture and come away with something different. And so we need to look to our modern day prophets and apostles and the church for official interpretation. And the thing about it is that when prophecy is received, I don't think even church leadership fully understands it. Like the scriptures say, we look through a glass darkly, meaning that we may get some glimmer of what's supposed to happen in the future. We have just a basic idea, but then over time, the Lord can reveal things line upon line, precept upon precept, and we get a better and better idea of what that prophecy that was originally given, what it actually means. And so I tend to go with what's been said recently because we don't know necessarily what additional revelation and inspiration has been given. And what I've seen when I put all these quotes about the 10 lost tribes or related concepts on a timeline is that it doesn't seem like the church believes that anymore, that there's a main body. Or even, okay, there's always the people that say, well, why can't it be both? The reason why is because either there are hidden people, whether it's a big main body or whether it's small pockets, like maybe multiple communities of the 10 lost tribes, either there's hidden people that are suddenly going to come out and say, oh, here we are. And we're going to be like, what? We didn't know that you could live there. Either that's going to happen or it's not. Okay. And if you look at the color coding here, I have red if it's a statement where it's just against the idea that there's a main body or hidden people of any sort, like physically hidden people. And then if it's pink, it's something that just generally goes against the idea of the 10 lost tribes, 10 lost tribes being in a main body. So for example, let's go to, I always use this as an example just because it's short and it's to the point. This is Elder Bruce R. McConkie in A New Witness for the Articles of Faith, page 520. He says, there's something mysterious and fascinating about believing the 10 tribes are behind an iceberg somewhere in the land of the north, or that they are on some distant planet that will one day join itself with the earth, or that the tribe of Dan is in Denmark, the tribe of Reuben in Russia, and so forth. A common cliche asserts If we knew where the lost tribes were, they would not be lost. True it is that they are lost from the knowledge of the world. They are not seen and recognized as the kingdom they once were, but in general terms, their whereabouts is known. They are scattered in all the nations of the earth, primarily in the nations north of the lands of their first inheritance. And I think that's right. Um, People will say, but we know that Christ went and visited them. Yeah, he did. A long, long time ago when they were still a main group and they had their culture and religion intact. But a lot can happen in even just a few years. So, say that they made their way up here to maybe like southern Russia, or maybe Eastern Europe, or maybe um, over here near Turkmenistan or something like that. Over time, cultures don't just stay isolated. They come in contact with other cultures in other kingdoms, other civilizations. And depending on the numbers, you can become assimilated into some other culture. You could lose your religion through apostasy, or you could be conquered. So, what if they were in an area where Islam came and then they all converted to Islam through force? Maybe that's what happened. And so, maybe the last people that were faithful that had the records, just like Moroni, maybe they hid them away somewhere. So, I think that's probably what happened. I think that they lost their identity. They just assimilated into various cultures in the area. They were probably overrun, maybe conquered. Who knows? I think that's probably what happened. Um, let's go back to the spreadsheet. I think that's why at the time, Elder Dallin H. Oaks of the Quorum of the 12 said this. This is the April 2006 General Conference, all men everywhere. He talks about how the Lord commands various peoples to write the revelations that they receive and prophecies and keep a record. And then he says at the end here, the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls shows one way this can occur in regards to scripture from the lost tribes of Israel. And I think that's really telling because I think a lot of people assume, no, the doctrine of the church is for sure that there's a hidden group somewhere. And then when they come forth, they're going to, in the flesh, give us their scriptures, like hand them over to us, and then we'll have their scriptures. Well, I don't know that that is the solid doctrine of the church. Otherwise, President Oaks would have said, we know that we'll receive the scriptures from the 10 lost tribes when they appear and then give them to us. He wouldn't have said, well, we could get them the same way that we got the Dead Sea Scrolls, that we're going to come across a cavern somewhere, or there's going to be this archaeological dig where, archaeologists come across it. No, he would have said, no, that's not how it's going to happen. It's definitely going to happen when they come from the countries of the north, when they come from the Arctic region or whatever. So anyway, I've done a lot of videos about the 10 lost tribes. I'm not going to go over all these quotes, but you can access my spreadsheets anytime. The link is in the description box of each video. Just come here on a desktop or a laptop, double click on the quote, and then you can read the whole thing. So we're going to go back in time. You can see all the red and pink up here in more modern times. When you get to 1967, that's the last time that we have a quote that supports the idea that they're in a main group. I added a column, column E for location. Like if there's a quote that supports the idea that the 10 lost tribes are in a main group, if it's a quote that includes where that speaker thinks that they are, then I have that indicated here. So let's go down to 1875. This is Elder Orson Pratt of the Quorum of the 12. And in this quote, which is pretty extensive, he talks about the fact that he believed that they were in the Arctic regions. I'm not going to read this whole thing, of course, but he says, from those dreary, desolate, cold Arctic regions, later on, from the Arctic regions, later on, passage to the pole. There's attractive country around the pole, Arctic. So he believed that that's where they were. And this is the only quote that I have that says anything about that, that makes it clear that they're coming from somewhere near the North Pole. If we go down to 1859 and 1863, I have a couple things that point to them being not even on Earth, like off world. So we have this hymn. I think this is by Eliza R. Snow. It's in Sacred Hymns and Spiritual Songs, 12th edition, page 386. And it starts off talking about the earth. And then in verse 2, it says, "But thy dimensions have been torn asunder, piece by piece, and each dismembered fragment borne abroad to distant space. When Enoch could no longer stay amid corruption here, part of thyself was borne away to form another sphere. That portion where his city stood, he gained the right approved, and nearer to the throne of God, his planet upward moved." Okay, so the idea that the city of Enoch is on a piece of earth that's been removed from the earth and become its own planet or planetoid, some kind of celestial body. And then verse 5, "And when the Lord saw fit to hide the 10 lost tribes away, thou earth was severed to provide the orb on which they stay." So now, not just the city of Enoch, but also the 10 lost tribes. Now, this is not scripture. It comes from Eliza R. Snow, but it could be based on things that she heard Joseph Smith say, or I don't know where she got the idea. Maybe she heard the brethren talking about it. We do have this from Wilford Woodruff. This is in his journal. You can find this on the Wilford Woodruff papers. And we're just going to read starting right here. "The evening was spent in conversing upon the subject of the 10 tribes of the North Country. The higher law of God in opposition to the law of gravitation in the ascension of Christ. Elijah and Enoch and the city of Zion to heaven upon that same principle, a portion of the North Country containing the 10 tribes may," and he does use the word may, "be separated from the earth." So, okay, that's interesting. Oh no, sorry, I do have another polar region quote. This is from Benjamin F. Johnson, an early church member. And he's talking about a conversation that he had with Joseph Smith. And I'll just read right here. "Other questions were asked when Brother Clayton was not present, one of which I will relate. I asked where the 9.5 tribes of Israel were. 'Well,' said he," this is Joseph Smith talking, "you remember the old cauldron of potash kettle you used to boil maple sap in for sugar, don't you?" I said, "Yes." "Well," said he, "they are in the North Pole in a concave just the shape of that kettle, and John the Revelator is with them, preparing them for their return." We do have this from FAIR, like the FAIR website. It's a group of apologists. They said, "The problem with this source is that it is late and secondhand. That is, it was not written by Joseph himself, but by someone who heard him say it, and it was written long after the conversation supposedly took place. Sources like these tend to be less than reliable because they are obscured by time and the writer's own personal bias. We also note that the comment was made as part of a conversation with others and not as part of a revelation. If Johnson's memory was accurate, There's nothing to distinguish Joseph's comment from idle speculation. And yeah, I think that's a good point. Who knows? Um, and then this whole thing with the city of Enoch, just really quick. If you go to the Wilford Woodruff Papers website, there's a few times in his journal where he talks about the city of Enoch coming from the earth. So this is also in his journal. He says, it was the opinion of the prophet Joseph that the city of Enoch was in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's interesting. And then here's another entry. I guess I'll just read the whole thing. Again, President Young said, Joseph the prophet told me that the Garden of Eden was in Jackson County, Missouri. And when Adam was driven out of the Garden of Eden, he went about 40 miles to the place the place which we named Adam Ondai Amen, and there built an altar of stone and offered sacrifice. That altar remains to this day. I saw it as Adam left it, as did many others. And through all the revolutions of the world, that altar had not been disturbed. Joseph also said that when the city of Enoch fled and was translated, it was where the Gulf of Mexico now is. It left that gulf a body of water. So, I don't know. So that's interesting. Again, he said that it was Joseph Smith's opinion. I think that's worth noting because I don't know of any other time that anybody has said that. When Joseph Smith is telling them something, they're like, well, it was his opinion, because maybe the prophet Joseph Smith clearly said, this is just my opinion, and that's why Wilford Woodruff wrote it that way. And then lastly, I just want to point out this anonymous poll that I've done. I don't know when I first did this, but this was probably in the first year of my channel. I have this poll that you can take. I'll put a link for it in the description box below. It's anonymous. The question is, which tribe of Israel are you from? And this is according to your patriarchal blessing. So you have all the tribes here, and then there's two options you may not be aware of. I guess there's some people whose lineage is declared only through Joseph, but not through his sons Ephraim or Manasseh. And I don't know why. Just for some people, that's how it is. And then for others, it's only declared through Abraham, which Abraham is not one of the tribes. He's the, he's the great grandfather of these men. So I don't know. That's just how it is for some people. So far, I've gotten exactly 1,600 responses. And if you go to summary, it shows you a pie chart, which probably isn't too surprising. Now, keep in mind, this represents my audience, and my audience is primarily from the United States. And then the next biggest group, I think, is from the UK, but it's a very small percentage. And then after that, it's probably Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So this doesn't represent it's not like worldwide. So just keep that in mind. If somehow I could have people from all across the world, especially South America, this would probably be a lot bigger. So you have 88.2% Ephraim, and then 5.8% Manasseh. But again, if I could pull people from Mexico, Central, South America, this would probably be a lot bigger for Manasseh. And then you have all the other tribes right here. If you go to question, it'll break it down how many people responded per answer. So the first two, Ephraim and Manasseh, and then after that, Joseph, just Joseph, not sorted into Ephraim or Manasseh. And then interestingly, the next three are Benjamin, Judah, and Levi. And I'm not going to pull up any articles, but hopefully you know that the Jews of today are primarily descended from Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. A lot of people think that they're just from the tribe of Judah. You have to remember that Levi did not have like a large piece of land. They had cities throughout Israel. And so when you had that division between the northern kingdom and Judah, there were Levites that were in Judah. So when the 10 lost tribes were conquered and carried away by the Assyrians, you still had Levites within Judah. And Benjamin, I guess because Benjamin bordered Judah, and I think they were allied with Judah, they stayed together. And so it's just kind of interesting that what I'm trying to say is that after Ephraim and Manasseh and Joseph in general, the next biggest group in my poll are what we think of today as Jews, essentially, or the tribes that primarily make up the Jews of today. It's interesting. Okay, and then after that, Abraham with 7, Asher 5, Dan 4, Gad 4, Naphtali 3, or Naphtali, I've heard it both ways. Reuben, Issachar, Zebulun, all with 2, and then 1 for Simeon. So, and you know, this may not be 100% accurate. Sometimes people do silly things, but I think it's generally accurate for the sample that I took. So I'll put a link for this in the description box below. But yeah, I don't know. Let's keep our eyes on August 12th. Again, it's perfect that it's going to be on the 12th for the 12 tribes of Israel. I would love if this was true, but you know, even if it doesn't have to do with the 10 lost tribes, just the fact that it's the eclipse of the century, that by itself is pretty interesting. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.